requested that since they have a conflict and are not able to join us today. But for those who are here, welcome. Happy Friday afternoon. Thank you for taking time to join us this afternoon for our first of a two-part LCAP introduction series. I'm Naomi DeMcCauley. I'm a director in the Assessment, Accountability, and Continuous Improvement Unit of Riverside County Office of Ed, and my colleagues and I, Brian Wood, Alicia Morf, and Melissa Bazanos, will be sharing some information with you today. Hopefully you'll find it helpful, and at any point, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question or type that in the chat. And before we get started, Brian, if you want to go to the next slide, I'd like to see kind of who's in the room. So we're going to launch a poll that asks, what is your experience with LCAP? And so it should be on your screen now. We'll give a minute for everybody to answer the question. What is your experience with LCAP? None. I've heard of an LCAP. I know what the acronym LCAP stands for. I've seen and read an LCAP, or I have written an LCAP. We got 75% of you have voted. Just give a couple more seconds to it. So it looks like there's some experience with LCAP. There's a few who have written an LCAP, so that's, and here are the results. Here's who's in the room with us. So quite a few have seen and read an LCAP, some have written, and there are some who understand what LCAP looks like, but it sounds like for the most part, everyone in here has heard of an LCAP. So our goal today is to provide an introduction or a refresher on the local control funding formula, the LCAP, and the LCAP template and instructions. And so hopefully it is something that will be helpful to those who are coming as a refresher or to support any new LCAP support staff in your district. And hopefully for those who are new, it will enlighten you to our LCAP world. And if it raises any questions, feel free to ask us. So I'll go ahead and get us started. And we're going to talk about the local control funding formula, which is, in short, the LCFF. And so 7 years ago, the funding model for California schools changed, and California adopted the LCFF, which is what that does is it provides an equal dollar amount per student allocation for every district based on grade level. Elementaries, schools with elementaries receive additional funding for class size reduction, and those with high schools get additional funding for your CTE, your career technical education. And LEAs also get additional funding for the unduplicated student groups of low income English learner and foster youth students. And so what does that mean for a district? For LEAs, not just districts, but also charters, so altogether LEAs. Basically, it shifted the responsibility for how money will be spent to the local organization. So that is LEAs, and so you'll notice LCFF. The first two words in that acronym are local control, and you'll notice in the LCAP, the first two words are also local control. So it is the expectation that LEAs will take that control and act using their resources fiscally, personally, materially, based on the needs of their students. And all the accountability for the spending of the LCFF funds lies in the LCAP, the Local Control and Accountability Plan. So it's in this LCAP where a district will document the operationalizing of its actions and services and the funding that support those, all to meet the 8 priorities for positive student outcomes in those 8 priorities, and meeting the district goals that will be outlined in that LCAP. And you'll see that the stakeholder engagement process is a very integral part of the process. And so when we go to the We'll talk later more about stakeholders in just a few slides. Next slide, please, Brian. Here's a graphic of what the LCFF, how it's allocated. So you can see that per student base amount. This graphic applies to elementary, where we've got the adjustments for a grade level reduction, and then the additional funds for your demographics, your unduplicated student groups, low income English learner or foster youth. If it were a high school picture, we'd still have the base student amount, but where it says grade level, it would be for the CTE funds. And so LCFF wasn't designed to really improve student outcomes through equity. So it's simplicity to aid in transparency. The formula was generated so that there was a student focused, so it's student focused, and equity is ensured in the expenditures for students. And of course it is aligned, the budget and the program plans are aligned there. And so it's very important for the program team and the fiscal team in a district to work together in developing this plan. Next slide, please, Brian. Part of the LCFF funding includes what are called the supplemental and concentration grants. And so these, on top of a district's base supplemental, LCFF funding, a district can qualify for supplemental and concentration grants. And so these are additional funds that accompany, that are part of LCFF that can be used for at-risk students. In particular, those three that I mentioned before: English learners, low income, and foster youth students. And these monies are to be used to provide support for any actions and services that are principally directed to and effective in meeting the needs of these three student groups. And we'll go into what principally directed to and effectively meeting the needs as we go into LCAP development. And that also alludes to increased or improved services. So there's this requirement in the California Code of Regulation in Title V. I put the links there in case anybody is a nerd like me and wants to look up the original source. And basically, this states that this is statute wherever LCFF funds are going to be expended, there's a requirement that the funds shall be used to increase or improve services for unduplicated students as compared to the services provided to all students. So those of you who just completed your learning continuity plan, because LCFF funds may have been used for some actions and services, there is the explanation in the increased and improved services section of that template to explain how these funds are used to increase and improve services for these students. And again, we'll get more into that as we go into LCAP development, but all of this is tied to LCFF funding. Next slide, please, Brian. And what does it mean to increase or improve services? Essentially, that first sentence that's in bold gives the gist of it. To improve services means to grow services in quality, and to increase means to grow services in quantity. So the quantity piece is relatively easy because you might have a tutoring service that is only for a certain number of students, and perhaps you want to increase that and increase the number of sections for it, or increase the number of students that can have seats in that program. To increase in quality doesn't necessarily mean you're spending any additional dollars or time even. An example of that is maybe you have an instructional aide, and instead of having that assistant do administrative or clerical tasks, perhaps that person directly supports students and provides in-class support or some kind of service that's directly helping students. So that would be an example of growing services and quality. Team members, if you want to jump in and provide other examples, please do. And so when we look at the big picture of LCFF, basically it's simplified funding with several state level structures to guide and inform the focus and practice. So we've got our state priorities, and then we've got the template, the LCAP, that supports our resource alignment, and then spending regulations to ensure equity, and that's the increased or improved services statute. We've also got the evaluation rubrics, which assess areas of strength and areas of need in in need of improvement at an LEA. And finally, we have the state system of support through which the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence was created, and that provides assistance for LEAs when warranted, or intervention if that's warranted as well. So that was kind of a brief run through of LCFF. Of course, we'll provide much more support and understanding through it as we go through our LCAP development this year. But take some time to reflect, and we can do it as a group in the chat. What is your understanding about the LCFF and LCAP? What about supplemental concentration grant funding? And what is your understanding about increased or improved services? Have any questions arisen? If so, what are they? I'll give us some time to ponder and unmute yourselves, or please feel free to type in the chat. Did I do such a good job? We're all experts? Yay. Okay, well, if you think of anything, then just pop up and ask us. And on that note, then we will move forward with the presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melissa Bazanos-Hutton. I'm the Executive Director of the Assessment, Accountability, and Continuous Improvement Unit. And I get the pleasure of working with all of the presenters today and all of you in the audience and participants. And we're definitely pleased to have a variety of background experience related to LCAP, because your insight and input assists us as well. I'm also just pleased that when we see LCAP in closed captionings, it actually looks like El Capitan, like Yosemite. So then it just makes me think about traveling. So that's good. But on a more serious note, when we talk about components of the LCAP, there's one of the things that is brought to light in the newest iteration of the LCAP template is that the LCAP template is a way for districts to memorialize their LCAP process. So when we think of LCAP, although it is a document, in reality, it's a representation of a very long process. And that process begins with looking at data to determine needs and successes. It's also crucial for our districts and our LEAs to engage stakeholders in the process, because stakeholders bring a voice to identified needs as well as areas of strength. Then from that analysis and engagement, we develop goals that are comprehensive and representative of our community. There are metrics where we can measure progress over time. We have actions that enable us to provide services to students and the community. And then we also have a way to represent the increased or improved services requirement that Naomi shared in the previous slides. So another way to think about that is the through line. So in essence, we think about our students, we analyze data related to our students, we look for where needs exist, we use that identification of need and gather input on how we might address those needs. Then we develop goals and actions. And then for our students that are that have additional needs, our unduplicated pupil groups, we increase and improve services for them in a principally directed and effective way. So in essence, we begin with the needs of students in mind as we develop our LCAP. Another visual representation of that is, how do we inform the development of the LCAP? It's not just the dashboard. It's not just our annual academic assessments. We have many sources of information to support LCAP development. We think about what happened last year, and our LCAP development process requires an annual update where we are reflecting on the impact of prior goals, actions, and services. We also engage stakeholders. We'll spend some time talking about that in depth in a few moments. We look at local indicators and state indicators. Those are both represented on the dashboard, but there's data behind those that we have at a local level. So the local data that we use is also very informative, because it sometimes provides us with additional metrics or additional points of information that the dashboard may not capture. So it's really the combination of all of those things that inform the development of the LCAP. It's not just annual dashboard data that informs LCAP. And one thing we do know is that based on our current circumstances, we won't have performance levels on the dashboard this year. We know that California waived, or the federal government waived California or most or all states the necessity to administer annual assessments. So we don't have our annual assessment data. And then Senate Bill 98 prohibits the Department of Education from publishing those annual performance levels on the dashboard. So we won't have that source of data that we normally have for developing the LCAP. So that's why local data really does inform and provide an additional lens that will inform LCAP development this year. On the next slide, we see, that some of our data will be in report form. So our dashboard not only provides the performance levels or colors on the dashboard, we also have additional reports. So we will see some of those additional reports that will provide some background information or some data for us. But unfortunately, it won't give us those performance level colors that we're used to seeing. So again, it'll be really essential to look at local data sources in development of this year's LCAP. So we'll have the additional reports as well as data quest to help us in developing the LCAP, but we also have our own internal data sources that can provide us details as well. So,
Melissa, I'm sorry, can I chime in just real
of course.
briefly? So I'm going to go back to this slide. So even though they're not publishing the local indicators this year, that's really your 1920 local indicators that you're not reporting. But districts should still be doing the stakeholder engagement process and collecting the data for your 2021 local indicator data that you will need to consider when you develop the LCAP as part of taking it to board in May or June. So, so I just didn't want everyone to get the idea that you're completely off the hook on local indicators. You do need to do that process this year. That would be what you would report in the 2021 dashboard.
Thank you, Brian, for that reminder. Absolutely. We're not entering local indicator this year into the dashboard like we normally do every November because that's not going to be published. However, it doesn't absolve us of the need to still engage stakeholders in that local indicator process. So thanks for that reminder. All right, so the next slide, again, I just wanted to mention some resources or the education code behind the LCAP. And again, this is very high level basics about the LCAP. We know that we need to use the current adopted template. We know that we have to address all state priorities, all 8 state priorities, and then 10 for our county offices. We have to have a public hearing. We have to have a board approval or a board adoption at the local level. So that public hearing and that board adoption are at 2 separate meetings. And then LEAs post the adopted LCAP on their homepage. And it goes through a review and approval process through the County Office of Education. So that's why we're partners in this endeavor. We know that LCAP is developed at a local level so that it is truly representative of the needs of your students and community. But we obviously want districts to be successful in that endeavor. So we want to provide support throughout the year. So this is kind of the starting point for this year, especially for those of you who are new to the LCAP development process. So with that, we'll pause for reflection again. And again, what did you hear or learn? What questions might you have? In considering the fact that we don't have the annual performance levels on the dashboard, what data will inform your LCAP this year? And then what might be your next steps? So I'll pause for just a few moments. And I do see a question in the chat, data to inform with the question mark. I don't know if you want to clarify what your question is, or if that's just a reflection that data will inform your LCAP development.
And Kristen, don't be afraid to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I
There
just
she
did.
is.
So I was probably one of the newbies on that poll that that Naomi had put out. So what I'm thinking is we're obviously using the data from the dashboards from whatever's we left off on, but we're also using our local data as district data with benchmark testings or anything that iReady or anything that we can top and address any academic learning, right? Or growth or mitigating learning loss, and how we're addressing that, as I'm assuming is that would be some of that data, in addition to then the surveys that we would be doing from Panorama to get their perspective. So is that the data that we're talking about?
Yes, districts have a wide variety of different approaches they're taking this year, since we are absent the annual kind of the end of year data that we had from the prior year. So you're right. So we look back at our prior dashboard to see where it is that we had areas of strength, areas of need. But if we stop there, we're actually missing the needs that may have arisen as a result of our 1920 year and into our 2021 year. So there are local data sources, like you mentioned, academics through benchmarks or performance tasks or whatever it is we're using for interim measures. And then for socio-emotional learning, we might have surveys or additional metrics that are available. Brian mentioned our local indicators. So there are surveys or kind of like rubrics that are part of the dashboard local indicators that give us our own self-reflection rating scale to see how we're doing with priorities 1, 2, and 3, some of our local implementation. So yeah, there's a variety of different data, and there isn't a one size fits all approach this year. It's, you know, what is it that is informing what it is that what we have done and what we need to do moving forward that can then inform the LCAP development.
Okay. Can I do a follow-up question on the rubrics? Where are the rubrics that you're referring to?
So they're self-evaluation, and I don't know if I don't think you use the term rubric, but it's a self-evaluation reflection tool that the dashboard coordinator has access to in the dashboard. But there's also Word versions, Microsoft Word documents that can be downloaded for the local indicators. So it looks like Brian is pulling it up on his screen. So yeah, on the Department of Education website, there you'll be able to see what those self-reflection tools are for the local indicators.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
So I don't know if I just demoed how to get that. I went to CDE and I just typed in local indicators in the search box, and it's the first box. So there's lots of webinars, and here's what you would really want to focus on. It's the self-reflection tools.
Okay.
And if you download this Word doc, it's many pages, but it has all the different reflection questions, rubrics, so on and so forth.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Naomi to talk a little bit more about stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, stakeholder engagement. So I'll be talking just about the process here, and later on we'll get into the template part of it. And so just so you can marinate in an exploration question on the next slide, the question is, what is your process for stakeholder engagement? So again, no need to answer it now, just take some time to marinate in what that might look like. And you may already know because you've engaged stakeholders through different areas in your district, and probably when you did the operations written report and local, oh my gosh, I already forgot it, the LCAP, the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. So, but we'll still go over some stakeholder engagement. On the next slide, we talk about the purposes of stakeholder engagement. And so why should you engage? Well, there are several purposes to stakeholder engagement. If you know your purpose and what you want to accomplish, this also will drive your thinking around that level of engagement. So consider whether you're informing, consulting, collaborating, or empowering stakeholders. How exactly do you want them to engage? What's your expectation for them? And what might be their expectations for their engagement? And then when and what around what to engage. So sometimes we, next slide, please. We default to having stakeholders just sort of inform or consult what we've already developed, but we may want to give them more of an opportunity to do so. And so if we really expect to bring around any changes to our system and adapt those changes and improve something, then we would have to be willing to let stakeholders have a higher degree of involvement. And so when and around what to engage our stakeholders, well, we know that stakeholder engagement is not a one-time activity. It should be frequent, authentic, and purposeful throughout the year. And so these are some ideas. These are not, this is not a comprehensive list. And so as you can see there, it says may include, but are not limited to the types of things that you see on the slide in terms of focusing, work, collecting data, analyzing and interpreting data, and using that data to make decisions. And then who might you engage? And the question around that would be to ask, why am I choosing this stakeholder, this group of stakeholders? And so we'll start, I'll go counterclockwise actually and start with connections. Who might the representatives be that would help with connections? Might they be union representatives or informal leaders in the LEA? When we get to interest, which stakeholders have a personal or professional interest in what the district is doing, or who might be potentially impacted by the actions and services that are being discussed. When we look at expertise, might those be researchers or consultants, or even representatives from higher education that might lend some other perspective to what we're doing? Looking at diverse perspectives, we don't always, in a great group, we don't always want all the people who are for our purpose and our what we think. We would need others who are also critics and those who aren't typically included in a stakeholder session we might hold. When we talk about responsibility, which individuals are directly involved in program operations and implementation or overseeing actions and services that we're talking about? Might those be teachers, staff, or site and district administrators that can be part of the group? And then when we look at an influence, which stakeholders might have such influence, either narrowly or broadly? Might those be our board members, district leadership, or other community and business leaders who would like to offer their support and perspective to what we're doing at our LEA? So again, things to consider on which and why the stakeholders you are inviting to engage. And the next slide should have, oh, this is just a real summary of it. Sorry, I forgot about this one. Stakeholders, the underscoring that stakeholders should understand why they're part of the process and what their role is, so that stakeholder engagement can be effective when they know why, when, what, and who is involved. And I believe the next slide should show resources for stakeholder engagement. Yep. So there are hot links there. They're all for linked to CDE. The LCFF resources priority 3, as well as the planning for LCAP and the school plan, particularly aligned to LCAP development, and the others, the other 2 on top are support as well. And so that's what I have for this part of stakeholder engagement. And I'll give you a few minutes to chime in with any thoughts or questions you may have about stakeholder engagement. Did you hear anything that was new? With whom might you engage? When will you do that? And what might be your next steps for stakeholder engagement? All right, hearing none, please again feel free to just chime in whenever you think of something, and I will pass the baton to Alicia.
Alicia, before you begin, let me fix the sharing because it was cutting off the closed captioning. So
No problem. While he's doing that, if you can and you're willing, I know it's Friday, I know it's the afternoon, but I love to see people's beautiful faces. So if you can and you're willing to show me your beautiful face. Oh, Kip's always on.
April, hi Kip.
And I mean, I love my team, but I always see their
Hi, Kristen.
Here's Camille. Alejandro, we just met last week. Oh, there's everybody. Okay, let's do a test. Okay, just show me your fingers. Who's been on, show me how many hours today you've been on Zoom. Ready? Between 1 and what, I don't know, 5, 6. Show me, ready? 1, 2, go. Show me how many hours you've been on Zoom today. Oh boy, yep, okay. All right, so you're dying. You're all dying slowly and slowly. You're zombies at this point. So I appreciate you. So let's try and be a little interactive, all right? So I'm gonna actually get us into the template. Yay! How many of you were able to, oh look, I have this cool background, to print out or get a copy of this? Naomi sent us the template. Did you guys get a copy? Okay, April gave me a thumbs up. I saw that. Kip has it memorized. Anybody else get a copy? Oh, I see there. A couple people have it. All right, great, because we're gonna get into it right now. Let me see. I'm gonna move my little chat screen. And as we're going through this, you guys, if you have a question, like I was just chatting with somebody in there, and when I started writing an LCAP, do you know the question I had? What's an unduplicated pupil? Like legit. So if you have a question, please just ask it. That's why we're here. So if you don't know what an unduplicated pupil is, just ask. That's why there's no dumb question, all right? So please just ask. That is why we're here. If you want to chat privately, that's fine too. Whatever works for you, okay? We're here to help. So go ahead to the next slide, Brian. All right. When we talk about the template, we're actually talking about a few different pieces that go together, okay? So we're not just talking about the fill-outable piece, all right? When we talk about the template, we're talking about the template, the part that you fill out, but we're also talking about the instructions and the tables and the annual update. So it's 4 pieces that go together when we talk about the template. So when we say you have to have your template posted on your website, we're actually talking about all of those pieces together, right? Even the instructions, you have to have the instructions posted on your website. So when we say the template, we mean everything, okay? When you have to turn in the template to us, it's all of the pieces, okay? So just so you're aware that when we're talking about that, that's what we mean. So let's kind of dig in a little bit. Oh, there it is. There's the overview of that. So there's a little bit of difference between what we want to talk about right now a little bit is the instructions. So we're not going to look at this piece right now, but the instructions. For those of you, so real quick, you can do a thumbs up in the thing or a who's actually going to be writing this or assisting in writing this? Thumbs up or hands up or you can do the little, give me a smiley face, whatever. So that's why we're here, right? You guys are here because you're going to be helping write this, right? All right. So you guys are going to want to know these instructions. This is going to be an important piece for you. There are prompts on the template piece, but the instructions are the part that's going to be super important for you guys to understand because the instructions are what you're going to have to follow. So the way they're structured is there's the purpose, the requirements, and then the considerations. So the considerations are the things that we're going to look for as a county office, right? So it's like at a minimum, you have to have these things or a sufficient response will be blah, blah, blah. So those are the things we'll be looking for. So adherence to the instructions is the instructions have the full force of the law. When the instructions say you have to have something in your LCAP, you have to have it in your LCAP, okay? And the approval, that's the approval criteria. Those of you who just went through the LCP process, we were not approvers. We have recommendations, but for the LCAP, we will be doing approvals. So That's a little bit different. Yes, Camille, it's in the resources that we gave you. Another thing that I want to tell you right now, though, if you go to the CDE website right now and try and pull up this template and these instructions, you're not going to be able to get this copy. They actually grade it out. And that's because they're working on some changes because of everything that's happened. So we're working off of the approved version from January before COVID happened. So most of the changes we believe, and Naomi, correct me if I'm wrong, will be to the annual update section. But, okay, Melissa's shaking her head, but they did pull the whole template for now. So just to let you know. Okay, next slide. So if you have a copy, and I hope you do, go ahead and look at page 7 and 8. And on page 7 and 8 is the very, very beginning of the instructions. It's actually called Introduction and Instructions. So mine's all highlighted, marked up. You can see. And Melissa's guiding some of you there. Those changes will be finalized by January 2021. I'm not sure of the date of the finalized for the annual update. I thought it was earlier than that, but Melissa, do you know if they have a date for when they have to have the annual update finalized?
I'll go back and check. There was something in legislation about when it needs to be approved.
I remember reading a date, but I don't know what it was. So Melissa's going to check on that. Good question, Kip. So if you guys can find page 7 and 8, and you'll see it. And I'm just going to give you like 1 or 2 minutes. It's pretty quick to read. Go through and read it. And yes, I'm the interactive one. I want you guys to like think of some things that and if we were in person, I would have you do the check mark, and this is really important information, and some question marks. But think of some things in here that are, for those of you who've read an LCAP before, like, oh, this sounds a little bit different. Or, hey, this is really important, or this might be something that I really want to bring to my team. So go ahead and take a minute. If you have any questions in the meantime, type them in. Camille, it should just say it's LCAP template 2124, but when you scroll down, it's page 8, 7 and 8. It should be in the shared folder there. Let me know if you find it. I'm gonna.
And Camille, if you just open LCAP template, it's item number 1 in the folder. It's the instructions are part of the template. So the text box is like the first half. Okay.
When you're done reading, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. You could do a virtual thumbs up as well. All right, I see Maria's ready. do like 30 more seconds and then we'll start talking about it. It doesn't have page numbers. So I actually numbered mine just real quick in the right-hand corner. And I meant to mention that, so thank you. Smarty, that came from a veteran there. Somebody who could probably be teaching this class today. All right. So you guys good? Got through most of it? All right, see thumbs up. It was just those 2 pages. Just do those 2 pages, 7 and 8. That's all you had to do. All right. April's little avatar is raising her hand, so I'm going to assume that means she's good. I think she always has her hand raised, but we'll go with it. All right. So the next part of this is if you guys were together in a group, I'd have you as a team, talk about how these instructions are talking about the process of developing your LCAP, right? So the LCAP is a document that you have to turn in and it has to get approved. But really, the impact comes from the process that you go through to develop this document, which involves, your stakeholder engagement. It involves this comprehensive strategic planning. You want to look at your data. You want to see what are the needs of my kids. You want to think about your budget and how can I spend this money to best support my kiddos? What's the best way that I can involve my stakeholders? How can I demonstrate that I'm going to increase and improve my services for my foster youth, my English learners, and my low-income students? So it's going through the process to develop this LCAP that is the most fundamental part of this whole thing. Does anybody have any questions on what they read on page 7? Just that first page right there. Or did anything stick out to anybody that they were like, oh, I didn't realize that, or that was interesting or eye-opening? No. All right, I know it's Friday afternoon, that's fine. Okay, let's go to the next slide real quick. Let's look at page 8. So on this slide, there's a few things I do want to break down on this slide. So the LCAP itself is a document, but the process, like I said, is paramount, is the most important piece. And on this page, there are a few important things. And one of them, go ahead and click, Brian. There's a couple clicks on here that I want to go through. So the screenshot does not line up exactly to the page 8 that you have. So just kind of roll with it. This was in the paragraph that starts the revised LCAP template. So this is kind of explaining the reason for the changes, because we had the LCAP template, and then they revised it for the 2021-24 cycle. So the reason that they did that, and one of the main reasons, is to make it more accessible for our stakeholders, right? We want the stakeholders to be able to understand what we're doing with funds and what we're doing to support our unduplicated pupils, our English learners, foster youth, and low-income students, right? We want to, of course, we had to reflect the statutory changes that there were, Assembly Bill 1840, and streamline the information. So that was one of the main reasons for the revised LCAP template. Go ahead, Brian. This little, the next paragraph under that talks about, the why are we writing the LCAP, right? We want to understand the improved opportunities for and outcomes for our students. And I love this little paragraph right there, given the present performances across the state, how is the LEA using budgetary resources to respond to student and community needs? And this is an important piece. And I mean, I could preach all day, so I won't get too crazy with it, but this isn't about what's going on at the district next door. This isn't about what's going on at the district down the street. This is about what's happening in your district and in your community. So it's your data and it's your stakeholders. So what's going to work for your community, right? And this is why we want to do a needs assessment And this is why it's so important that it's focused on what's going to work for your students, and that you don't just say, hey, this is working next door, let's try it. It's more important that you think about what's going to work for my kids in my community, and not just waste money on things that, sound good or might have worked next door, because not what worked next door doesn't always work for you. So it's, I love that little piece right there. So anyways, your overarching frame. And then the last piece is the structure of the LCAP template and instructions itself. So any questions on page 4? Go ahead. Yes, Patrice. Oh, nope. Just changed your mind. Anybody have any questions? All right. Man, Naomi, we're doing such a good job today. Killing it. Okay. So again, the prompts versus instructions. The instructions are what we just started looking at, that piece right there. The prompts are what is in the actual fill out. You can't see because I have this really adorable background, but this piece where you're actually going to fill in, those are the prompts, right? The prompts are outward facing. So the prompts are what the parents and the stakeholders are going to see. They're a little bit easier to understand. So they're like a little bit summarized. So if you just try and fill out your for the prompts, you're not going to hit all of the things you're supposed to that are in the instructions. So like I said, the prompts are for the readers. Instructions are for the writers. So they are not suggestions. Okay, this is what has to be followed. The instructions have to be followed. We do have a good practice guide. I'm not sure, it might need to be updated, so we'll have to double check and get that out to you guys, where what we've done is taken the instructions and put them into the actual fill-outable template. So it's a little bit easier to have it up on one screen and just kind of throw everything together. So we'll try and get a copy of that to you guys as soon as we can. But any questions on prompts versus instructions, or the first couple pages of the instructions? And it looks like Melissa put something in about SB 820. Did you want to?
Oh, it's just the confirmation of what was asked before about the revision of the template. So it is by January 31st, 2021, and that was shared at CISC and was also approved within Senate Bill 820. So in what it basically is asking the new template to do is to reflect that the annual update should be a reflection of both the prior LCAP and the learning continuity and attendance plan.
All right. So if there's no questions, then we will take a stretch break. Look at that cute little kitty. So take a few minutes. I'll stay on if anybody has any questions for a little bit, but if you guys want to take a few minutes and take a break. And thank you for playing along, to all of you, for showing me lovely faces. I appreciate it.
We'll start back in 5 minutes. So 1:55, 5 to
Perfect.
2. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to at least get out of your chair for a moment, stretch, and then we'll jump back into going through the first section of the template that you will be filling out. So I'm going to briefly review the plan summary section of the template. So the plan summary is going to give an overview of your entire LCAP. It's going to give some general information on the school district, give the highlights of the LCAP, and it's your first real opportunity to reflect on what your data is telling you about your district or charter school. So we're going to dive into these main elements here in the next couple of slides. One thing to keep in mind here, when you're writing about your school or district, you're not limited to only write about your unduplicated pupils. The intent of that is to give your stakeholders and the readers of your LCAP a general overview of your local context. So maybe the size of your district, how many schools you have, your basic student demographics, and any other major things that you think would be important for the reader to understand as they're going through your LCAP. For those of you that have in the poll that Naomi started with, I know that many of you have written LCAPs in the past. Some of you have at least read LCAPs. So remember that the template did change from the last adopted LCAP. So the last one we had in the 1920 school year, that was for the 1920 school year, that you would have done at the end of June 2019, had some different elements. And so this is going to be changed in this new template going forward. You can see that a few of the areas were condensed and combined, and we'll dive into what those are. So if you still have the template out in front of you, on the actual template where you type in the responses, it's page 1 and 2. The instructions for this are down on page 9. So going from the previous LCAP, what used to be called the story is now maps to general information. You have what used to be called the greatest progress section is now going to be reflection successes. And greatest needs and performance gaps used to be 2 separate sections, and they're now combined into a section called identified need. There is still the LCAP highlight section that's now kind of moved to the bottom of this section, and it actually helps with the flow of the document. So what needs to go in each of these sections? If I can get it to advance. So as I said before, the general information section is just an opportunity for you to tell your story. For those of you that ever have written a SIPSA or a school accountability report card, you know that there's a similar section in those documents to just kind of give the reader an overview of about your school if you're a charter school, or your district if you're a district. So describe your school and community, maybe the geography. Are you suburban, urban, rural? Your size, your different schools, so on and so forth. The next 2 sections, this is really critical in going back to what Alicia said a moment ago. The prompt that's on the page is really for the reader of the LCAP to orientate them to what should be in that box. But you as a writer need to pay very close attention to the instructions, because if you just read the prompt, reflection successes, a description of successes and our progress based on review of dashboard and local data. Well, that's pretty straightforward, and this gives you an opportunity to tell what's going well. So, you know, if we were in a normal year and had a dashboard, maybe what's blue or green on the dashboard, you might comment on. So where does your district or school really shine? Notice that it's beyond just the dashboard. It can be any other local sources of data. It can be your stakeholder input that's informing that box. So it's not strictly limited to the dashboard. The next section, however, identified need, it says description of areas that need significant improvement based on the review of dashboard and local data, including areas of low performance and significant performance gaps among student groups on dashboard indicators, and any steps taken to address those areas. So this is an example of where in the instructions, there's very specific information that needs to be included in this section. And we'll have an opportunity to see that here in a moment. But the first thing that you're required to comment on in this box from the dashboard. Now, I don't know if we'll get any different instructions when the revised template comes out, but as it stands right now, you would need to go back and look at the most recent dashboard, which is the 2019 dashboard. And you're going to need to identify any performance areas on the dashboard where your overall performance, all students, was either red or orange on the dashboard. So those need to be listed, and you can see that represented in the graphic here with the arrow pointed to the red or an arrow pointed to the orange. Additionally, you need to, oh, I should mention that used to be in the old template, that was called the greatest need. The second required element in this box is for any student groups that are performing 2 or more performance levels before the all student performance group. So for example, if all students is green on your dashboard, but you have any student group that is orange or red, then you need to include those, that discussion and that identify those performance gaps in this section. So I will tell you, as a compliance matter, when you submit your LCAP, that is something that those of us on the county review team, we will be looking to make sure that you've addressed those required elements. And if not, we'll be reaching back out to you to make sure you do that. Now, in addition to those 2 required elements, you can certainly include any other elements that you have on there. So I see a question in the chat. What if you don't have enough to have a color? Well, that could be true, especially for a charter school, that you may not have enough students in a student group to receive a color. But you have your local data, you have maybe the data is displayed, but not a color on the dashboard. So you can still identify additional needs. It could be a need that's been identified based on any local measures you have in place. If you give, assess district benchmark assessments or use something like iReady or MAP assessments or something that could be identifying. Now you have, all of you put in learning continuity attendance plan, how you're going to identify any learning gaps that have appeared due to COVID. So you can certainly include that data. So you're not limited to this. It's just you are required to have those 2 particular areas identified in this section. And then the last real section that you're going to fill out is LCAP highlights. And I will tell you, when I wrote LCAPs, I did this box last. So this became, in a sense, my executive summary of the LCAP. So after we've gone through the LCAP, we've written the LCAP, we've put in, we've revised actions. So this provided me as a writer of an LCAP to give a brief summary of what's in the document. It allowed me to highlight a few key, maybe a few key actions, a few, few things that were very prominent from our stakeholder engagement. So I made sure that I included those items in the LCAP highlight. So just a little tip, you may want to hold off on writing the LCAP highlight until the end of after you've written the entire document. And really taking all of these areas together, it's kind of a different version of the graphic, but what I think it was Melissa's section talked about this through line. So the idea is you're providing everything in your document so far is kind of, in a sense, setting up the reader so they kind of know what's coming next. You've talked about your data, you've talked about what's going well, maybe where your challenges are, you've given some highlights so that as the reader goes through the remainder of the LCAP, they can see what's probably coming. So this is another way to kind of look at that. The idea is this through line at 50,000 feet to see you've taken all the elements that are in your document and you're laying it out on these first few pages of the LCAP. As many of you know, you have some of these LCAPs become, 100, 150, 200 pages. It's a lot for anyone to read through. And so this provides you an opportunity in the first couple of pages of your document to give the reader just a sense of where you're going. So we'll pause here for a second if there's any additional questions, and go ahead and speak up or post in the chat before we move on to stakeholder engagement.
Brian, I see a couple of questions in the chat. One is, what maybe you already responded, what if you do not have enough students in these groups to obtain a color? And then the other question was, how many students are needed to obtain a color? So
to obtain a color on the dashboard, you need to have at least 30 students in that student group. And you have to have it both years to obtain a color, because remember, dashboard colors always compare the most recent year to the previous year. So if you only have 29 students in a group, you're not going to receive a color. However, you often will have the actual data is reported for that student group. So the part I was mentioning back on the greatest needs section, you do need to specifically call out any of those student groups that meet that criteria, but you can always include additional student groups or additional data that you have beyond the dashboard. So if your local data is showing you that there's a need, you can certainly include that, should include it. Okay, let me move on, jump into the next section for stakeholder engagement. This is where you're going to spend a whole lot of your time the next several months, is really around this section. So we started today's presentation, Naomi went through this section and really talked about the purpose of stakeholder engagement. The idea is that this LCAP should be informed by your stakeholders. What are your different stakeholder groups telling you about your district or school? So, and then you're writing your plan to that. So, so again, it's a little deceptive in that there's 3 short prompts to write, but you really need to dig into the instructions. There are some very key elements that you need to make sure you include when you're completing the stakeholder engagement section. So, so obviously you're not going to go, you know, if you've got 10,000 students in your district, you're not ever going to ask each and every parent, each and every student what they think, but you need to think about including as many varied pieces of information, different groups as you can. And that's what's going to be make it the strongest plan. So you want it to be inclusive of all of your stakeholders. And you're not only seeking certain points of view or certain groups of parents, certain groups of teachers, and so on and so forth. So the point of this is to make sure you're addressing the needs of all of your low performing and underserved students. So, so I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to give you a minute again to go back and look at the instructions. So now you're looking at stakeholder engagement. It's pages 10 to 12 of your document. You won't be able to necessarily do a real deep read at this point, but please take a few minutes and just skim through it, get a general sense of what there, and we're going to dive into a couple of specifics on the next few slides. So go ahead and take a moment to review the instructions. Let's give you all about 1 more minute to finish up skimming through that section. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a chance to kind of skim through that, get a sense of what's in there. We're going to dive into a few key sections, kind of like what we did with Alicia at the beginning of the document. So the first section is talking about the purpose of stakeholder engagement. And the one thing I would like to really emphasize in this section is the word ongoing. The best stakeholder engagement happens authentically and ongoing over time. So if you're thinking of stakeholder engagement as a one-time event where I invite everyone to come and tell me what they think, that's not really going to help you in writing your LCAP. What I found most effective in my previous district role of writing LCAPs is we had an ongoing engagement of stakeholders throughout the year. And I would kind of chunk out the pieces of engagement all throughout the year. So for example, in parent advisory group, right at the beginning of the year, one of the first things I would do would be to share our dashboard data and our local indicator data and talk about that. Obviously, that would look a little differently this year. And then the next meeting, we might start talking about a review of our actions and what's working, what's not working. The third meeting, we might start then talking about, well, what kind of new things would you want to see to address our concerns, and give me your feedback there. And then maybe it's the fourth meeting that I had with the same group where I'm starting to bring my early drafts of the LCAP and having them give me feedback. So it's an ongoing process throughout the year. If I try to do that all in one big meeting, I would lose everyone about halfway through. So just something to think about as you're doing and engaging authentically throughout the year. Notice that the other key thing that you're wanting to capture in the LCAP, and there's a specific prompt for it, is how the feedback that you've received from your stakeholders, how it influenced your LCAP, how it's influencing either the goals, the actions, the dollar amounts, maybe what you start doing or stop doing, and you need to make sure you're capturing that. So it's not enough in the LCAP to just say we did stakeholder engagement. You are required to describe and show how that stakeholder engagement, how that feedback you received influenced your LCAP. The other thing that this specifically applies to school districts and county office of ed, but I think as a charter school, you would want to follow the same process the best you can. Maybe you don't have bargaining groups, but it is very specific in statute that you include all of these groups. Here's my quick editorial comment, having just read everyone's learning continuity and attendance plan. A few districts out there, a few charter schools out there missed this piece in your learning continuity and attendance plan. So again, it's not in the prompt, it's in the instructions. So make sure you are including each of the identified groups and you're reflecting that in your LCAP. The one that's very often missed is students. So make sure you're providing some way that you're providing some interaction with your students. The other thing that, just my personal opinion, I don't consider local bargaining groups to count always for teachers and other school personnel. To me, those are distinct things because what your teachers may tell you generally might be very different than what you hear from the union leadership. So again, I think it's important to you specifically disaggregate that out as well. There are two requirements. Again, this applies to districts and county office of ed. you must share with these two groups. So a parent advisory committee that's established in your district, and then also essentially your DLAC. If your district has enough English learners to have a DLAC, then you're required to share with them. And I believe in Riverside County, that's going to be everyone. So you are required to share your kind of a final draft of the LCAP with these two groups. So again, have that be like agendized with them, have it more formal presentation and capture that. There's also a requirement that the superintendent needs to respond in writing if you receive any comments from these groups about your LCAP. So again, we'll get more detail into that as we get through the workshops this year, but just kind of plant that seed. Here's the slide on what I just said. So superintendent's required to respond in writing to comments received from these committees. So if the DLAC, if you present to the DLAC and the DLAC decides, they really don't like this thing, they want to see this action or this service or stop doing something, whatever that might be, then your superintendent is required to respond to that in writing. This is a new requirement in this new template. So again, something that you need to be thinking about now as you're kind of planning out the year. Again, specifically applies to school districts and county office of education. You must consult with your SELPA when you're developing the LCAP. So, and I think what's key here is this doesn't mean when it's all done, you show them the LCAP. You need to be having this discussion when you're developing the LCAP. So what input would they have into your plan? And obviously that would be based on your data of your special education students. So Camille, did you have a question? Or maybe she unmuted
there
by accident.
So no, sorry, because we're such a young charter school, we don't have the committee established for our English learners, and we can definitely do that this year. So do you have any suggestions for how we would go about doing that?
So establishing your ELAC, or in your case, it would be a combined kind of ELAC / DLAC because you're a single school
Correct.
charter.
Mm-hmm.
That's well, Camille, that's probably a whole nother hour workshop that we could do, but
Okay.
yeah.
But that's something that I could discuss with you and Alicia, and you could give us some guidance on that, because we need to do it sooner rather than later.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so just wrapping up on the SELPA question. So make sure, I know in Riverside County, most districts are part of Riverside County SELPA, and I know they're aware of this requirement as well. So that is something to just have on your radar to make sure you are meeting this requirement and you're capturing it in your stakeholder engagement section. And so the other piece here, this requirement talks about, notice it says should, it's not must, but I'm going to emphasize this as a best practice. I very strongly believe, I just know when I was in the district doing this work directly, I got my best input and best dialogue from the school district, school site councils. And so what was my practice in my previous district, now, admittedly, I only had 12 schools to go through, so that helped. If you have a much larger district, you may need some help to do this. But I made it out to every school site council in the wintertime and asked the principals to put me on the agenda. And I would go out. Now the principals did some work before I got there. So, maybe the meeting before they had shared some things. And then I would go and be able to highlight a few key things in the LCAP. One thing I was always sure to do when I went to a school site council is I created a one-page little summary of all the services the students at that school were receiving from the district LCAP. And so it made it kind of personalized to that school. So if we had a behavior mental health counselor serving that school, I brought that information and I could share how many students that counselor is seeing, how many hours of service they provided, so on and so forth, how much their teachers have benefited from professional learning that was in the LCAP. So whatever it was that I could show that's being provided at that school, I would do that. And then I would ask for their input and get that. So I very much recommend and highlight this practice. I think it's very important. And then there's a few other checkoffs kind of thing here is to, this is actually from the audit guide to make sure that you're doing all of these things. So this is in the annual audit guide. This is something that your local auditors are going to ask for. So I found it best practice, once again, to include in the LCAP. I would include it in this section. So when the auditor came and asked me, what was the date of your public hearing? What is the date that you presented to the Parent Advisory Council? I could just show them the LCAP document and it was all there. There's some additional requirements here that they're going to ask for. So let's just dive into the prompts real quick and I'll finish up my section. I've already gone on too long. So prompt 1 is a summary of the stakeholder process. So this is where you're going to tell the readers what you did. So the meetings you had, again, I think it's best practice to include the dates of when you had different meetings, and you're just simply describing. And the way you do this is pretty wide open. I think a narrative kind of reads better, but you can include, bulleted lists or whatever's kind of helpful for you to get that information response. So notice the section here, there's include at a minimum. So what that means is, and this is really for us at the county office review, we're going to want to see, did you meet with all those required groups? So when we're reading this description and we don't see anywhere where you call out, you got feedback from students, that's going to be something we'll communicate back with you and say, you know what, it looks like you missed this group. So make sure you're including, and then notice it says a sufficient response must include. So this is where you need to make sure you're including timeline, meetings, other engagement strategies. And so, everyone does a survey, so make sure you include the survey information, so on and so forth. Prompt 2 is a summary of that feedback. So prompt 1 tells us what you did. Prompt 2 is going to, where you're going to tell the reader what that feedback was. And it can be organized how it best fits you. It can be organized by here's what they said at this meeting, here's what they said at the follow-up meeting. But you need to make sure you're including what specific groups are telling you. This is an opportunity to summarize that feedback. So for example, the sentence stem might be, parents wanted to see XYZ, or parents were concerned about this. Students, however, had this different feedback. Our bargaining groups thought, this other thing. So the best you can do there is name specifically the different required groups to make sure you meet that. But it really gives you an idea to talk about trends and inputs. And remember, again, that big picture through line. What is your feedback telling you that the next step in this template is going to be launching into your goals and actions? So making sure you're capturing your feedback that's going to, in a sense, justify the actions and services that are in your plan. And then finally, prompt 3, and this is the key one really of the whole section, is what aspects of the LCAP that are influenced by stakeholder input. So this is where you kind of make the connection. You've talked to your stakeholders. These are the main themes they told you. Now, what's changed in your LCAP? And the more specific you can be here, the better. So you can say things, we added this certain action. We changed this goal statement from this to this. We stopped doing this other action because of our feedback. So the more specific you can be as to what's changed in your plan, what's new and different, what's added, based on your stakeholder feedback, the better. And so, so here's just some few different bullet points of the kinds of examples of things that might be different in your LCAP based on stakeholder feedback. I think there's a couple of slides here. So, so again, the stakeholder feedback section is really your opportunity, again, to set up the rest of your document. When you then later launch into your goals and actions and services in the plan, your stakeholder feedback becomes the why you're doing those actions and services. So that's the end of that section. Let me pause for a moment and we will see if there's any questions you might have, and go ahead and unmute yourself or pop in the chat. I don't think I saw any new questions in the chat, but I'll pause a moment just in case.
Hi, Brian. This is Emily DeVore in Alvord. I don't know if I have a question, comment, not exactly sure what it is, but when we're seeking this stakeholder input in the next few months, I think we all in this room can appreciate the fact that our stakeholders' minds are going to be in different places other than the LCAP. What words of wisdom or advice could you provide us to maintain a focus for our stakeholders and looking beyond our current climate and really being able to identify an LCAP that's going to support after this is over? And,
Yeah,
and basically I'm asking you, can you cure COVID?
Yeah. Can I add her question too? I feel like I'm a little bit leery about this process because there's so much stakeholder engagement that's happening right now just around school reopenings, school staying in distance learning. And so I feel like if I try to mix in with, oh, and by the way, how are we doing, types of questions, it's like, what is she talking about? And then I'm going to get data that's wrapped up in parents' minds about, whether or not kids should be in school, whether they should still be at home, and all those things.
I think it's going to be really hard to streamline.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know that I have a great answer, and unfortunately, I don't have the cure for COVID in my back pocket. But so I guess what my first comment back would be is all this feedback you are getting and have been getting is certainly feedback you should also be using for your LCAP, right? So it's not like you have to, all this previous stakeholder engagement that's been occurring has to stop and you start new stakeholder engagement for LCAP, right? It's all
And not, Brian, let me clarify. Not that you should, but you can use it, right?
Right. Well,
right.
Now I would probably hazard to guess that, I mean, because obviously this is just affecting everything you're doing in a school district or school, it's probably very relevant to your feedback. Now, remember the LCAP you're starting to write now is the look ahead document for next school year, right? 21-22 school year. So the learning continuity attendance plan is the document you just wrote for this school year and maybe some will last. So, so it is kind of the mind shift a little bit of starting that look ahead, right? hopefully we're starting to transition back to what looks more like regular school, but we're going to have lots of needs, right? We're going to have learning gaps that have happened and so on. So that would be my first thing. My other thing would be, as much as possible, the more you can kind of front load your expectations when you're meeting with the group, the better. So the example I gave when I went out to school site councils as a district director, I didn't just walk in cold. I didn't walk into the meeting and say, so tell me what you think, because I never knew what I would get. And it might be everything from, what just happened in the news that day, or one person's really mad on the homework assignment their daughter got in so-and-so's class 2 days ago. And that wasn't real useful for me from writing an LCAP. So I was always kind of front loading information on that meeting. So as I said before, I would have the principals kind of share their data, their school, all that beforehand. I would prepare a document that showed the services they were getting, so they had that in front of them. So then that kind of helped frame my discussion. So in this respect, I don't know how it looks virtually, but if you really want to talk about learning gaps and talk about your test score data, then maybe you share that data with them before the meeting and say, this is what we really want to get your input on. So how do we address these learning gaps? What do and so you're kind of front loading the purpose. Now there may still be some venting and all that you kind of have to manage. But I think the more you can kind of front load and have an agenda, here's my purpose for the meeting, here's the input I'm seeking, I think just helps focus that conversation. Alicia, I don't know if you have any tips or
Well,
tricks.
I see Lisa's adorable little head there, so I bet you she has some great input.
So Brian, you were stealing ideas right out of my mind as you were talking there. I think you're onto something really good to keep that focus. Well, one, knowing that it'll probably be virtual, I would say short chunks of time, right? Because we can't have parents on a 3-hour LCAP meeting. In fact, it's hard to even hold their attention for a 3-hour in-person meeting. So just thinking about it in really short chunks. And I think what Brian is saying about really having a tight agenda, and they see that agenda prior to coming, and organizing all of the activities that you're doing with them as much as you can, making it interactive. So it's not just this stand and deliver and them listening to you. I don't know if Hemet is on the call today, but I have to give a shout out to them. David Howland and started the work of around the LCAP, and then Alex Ballard has taken that work over, and both of them, I think, just did a really amazing job with stakeholder engagement out there in Hemet. And it really was around like start, stop, continue activities. That was something they would engage all the parents in. As Brian said, what are all the actions that we have in our LCAP? And let me get your opinion on them. We might have data as a district, but they might have the anecdotal data that we're missing. So if their child is receiving one of those services, to hear from that parent how that's going or what their perception is of it is really powerful. So we did a lot of start, stop, continue activities. Then we got into the data to really look at that needs assessment. Where do we still need to be doing better? And then we just kind of had an open forum around, well, what do you think we should be doing? And those resulted in some, let's call them outside of the box ideas. Like, I think somebody wanted us to, we were talking about ELA, and they wanted us to have like organic salad bars at all of the schools. We're like, okay, that's a good idea, but let's maybe come back down to reality. I'm not sure that we can make direct connections to improving English language arts with organic salad bars, but just hearing them, and Emily, you look like you might be in support of that. I don't know, healthy food does fuel the brain in good ways, but
Right, we need our leafy greens.
yes. But I mean, that's just one example that stands out because it was so kind of outside of the box. And then we did spend-a-dot activities, so now we've got all these parent ideas up on the wall for this one goal that we're talking about. So finding a way to do like digital or virtual spend-a-dots, because then the organic salad bar doesn't rise to the top, but it's not you who kicked the salad bar out, right? It's everybody else going, oh yeah, more counselors are a great idea, or more whatever it is. So I would say just trying to take those interactive activities that we do when everybody's in person and finding a way to have these like chunked meetings that are really focused on one topic, and infusing those virtual meetings with interactive activities. I think that would really help it kind of stay away from maybe COVID. It's still going to come in. I mean, I think it's still going to happen, but then you have a way of kind of bringing everybody back to the job at hand.
Is there time for me to throw in one more thought here?
And then me.
And then Steve. Okay, wow, this really got us all riled up here. So, I mean, the LCAP is not a checkbox exercise. That's my butt. Know that at the end of the plan, you're going to have millions of dollars in supplemental and concentration funds that you're going to have to show how you're increasing and improving services on, right? And I suspect, given the budget climate, that there's going to be some things that are informed by the pandemic, and you need to think about that through line from the moment of stakeholder engagement and get those questions in front of your parents, so that if you're thinking about certain ways that you suspect you're going to spend your supplemental and concentration in order to meet your increased improved services requirement, that you shape that conversation to get you to that goal line at the end. This year, the continuity plan is not, it's got a different set of expectations than this document will once we go back to somewhat regular order in the review. So I would also think about, how can I put enough information in front of my parents? And you're going to hear about COVID, I agree, but that the COVID is the situation that's creating the need, that's going to create some goals, that will create some actions, and that'll create spending, right? So if you don't start that now in the stakeholder engagement, what you might find out at the end, not that this has ever happened to any of us, that you're being asked to pay for things in your LCAP that you just don't have the story to tell because you didn't do the stakeholder engagement at the beginning to get you there. So that's the other sort of like, that runs the danger of this being a checkbox sort of exercise. But to get to authenticity, if you're anticipating those needs and expenditures, not that we would do it absent stakeholder feedback, but like that process should be starting now to get you to the end of the new template in 6 months or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I just quickly wanted to highlight, or say that maybe just highlight actions and services from the previous LCAP that came about as a result of the engagement with the stakeholders. That way you can point to something and say, last year or previous time we wrote an LCAP, we were able to include this because of your feedback and because of your engagement. So we need ideas that we can measure, that we can measure, because that's part of the things that we need to do with that. But letting them know that we've listened in the past, and that any ideas you're going to consider based on the fact that they're measurable and that you can actually show contributing to, needs of the unduplicated group. So I'm trying to keep it brief.
So as you can see, our team is passionate about this subject. So if you guys need anything else or have any more questions, let us know. Reach out to any of us individually, or send Naomi an email and she'll put you in touch with whatever passionate team member you wish to speak to. And that's not just Emily and her team, anybody who wants any help with stakeholder engagement. I know you're not the only one who's asked, Emily. We've had questions from other districts too about, it's a process and right now it's hard. So we appreciate that.
And just to clarify as well, just to make sure that I'm being clear, because I don't want to come across in a negative way, that I'm not just talking about parents either. I'm speaking of all of the stakeholder groups. Parents are not the only ones who can't think outside of COVID. So just to clarify that piece.
Well, and I
We
want
under-
to, you know, I don't think we should be thinking outside of COVID because it's not like we can separate it.
Right.
COVID has put us in a situation where we have student groups with needs that maybe they never had before when they were able to be in school. And we don't have a clear definition of what needs are in place right now because we don't have state assessment. We don't even have local assessment from the spring because we were in a hold harmless situation. And so I don't know. I feel like we don't want it to get into the session where we're complaining that kids aren't back in school, but that is the very problem that we're going to have to address moving forward and how we mitigate that learning loss or whatever the positive term they want us to use in accelerating students' learning or whatever it was. But I think that's just the issue that I have. There's so much uncertainty that's difficult to bring stakeholders together and go, well, we're not really sure who's having the problems and what those exact problems are because we don't have data to support it. And we don't know if kids are going to be back in school anytime soon. So we don't know how we're going to address it. It creates a lot of complicated conversation.
Yeah.
Well, and data, you know, so my quantitative brain doesn't like going there, but, you know, the LCAP and associated statute doesn't only contemplate quantitative data, right? Now, I don't know how you write a goal around qualitative data, and all the legally required metrics are numeric, but, you know, qualitative data is still valid data for those of you who've had to go down that road. So, you know, I'm not sure how you work that with stakeholder groups, but, you know, the numbers would be a lot easier to justify need, but the sort of feedback you're getting from teachers, you know, there's other ways of collecting data in the absence of the test scores is still of value and even more need right now, right?
Survey data. Melissa, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't want to cut the conversation short. So I'd like, if we want to stay on after 3 o'clock, we can certainly continue. But for those people who have 3 o'clock commitments, I want to be sure that we at least let them know what services and resources are available. And then we can definitely stay on after 3 to continue. So
Thank you. Because we could talk about this all day long. All right. So moving forward, let's talk about planning, because that's really what we're talking about. So you guys have done a great segue here. So you really want to be backwards mapping, right? When you're thinking about planning for your LCAP. And you guys are doing a great job thinking about your stakeholder engagement. And you're right, Emily, it's not just parents, right? You need to get your bargaining unit groups and your administrators and your community members and everybody involved. So you want to think about, you know, it's due at the end of June is when your submission date is for us. So you want to backwards map from that. And we have some templates that we have provided for you guys in the shared folder there that you guys can look at. So a couple of them, and I'm just going to go through them really briefly because we only have a few minutes left and I want Naomi to talk about the fast pass process. And I know it's not required, but I'm hoping everybody on this call signs up for FastPass because it's super awesome. And anybody who went through a call with us, Naomi and I recently, or anybody on the team, it's really very similar to that before board approval. But anyways, let Naomi get into that. So this one is just it's like a month by month at a glance, and it has pretty much everything on it. The only thing we do want to update on this one is we want to add CSI. So look for that coming up soon. We do want to add the CSI to this so you can see that timeline on here as well. So this one has your when is CalPEDS updates due? When's the unduplicated pupil count come out? When is the LCAP development timeline? Title funds. So everything is on this document. So when you look at this document, everything is on there. So don't be overwhelmed by it. And if you have any questions, let us know. Next slide, Brian. This one is one of my favorites because I'm a checkbox and I like to put names to items. So this one's pretty cool. It was developed by San Diego County and we borrowed it. They let us have it. We share all the time. But it really goes through like fall, winter, spring. What should you be doing to get ready for your LCAP? So right now, you guys are doing a great job. You're already thinking about that stakeholder engagement piece. So this talks in fall about who should be on your stakeholder engagement groups. What groups should you be talking to? And you have that plan. And then in that who section, you're going to put like, who's responsible for that? Is it Emily? Is it Alejandro? Like who's going to be responsible for planning those stakeholder sessions or contacting those administrators, or what are we going to be doing to get those stakeholder ball rolling? What documents do we need to have? So this is a really neat document to use as well. Next slide, Brian. This one, and I've had a couple people ask me for this, and I'm so excited we found it. But this one is it's an LCAP CSI SIPSA planning guide. So for those of you who want to line up your LCAP, CSI, and your SIPSA, this is a document for you. But the caveat here is that not everybody's SIPSA timelines are the same, and we realize that. Not everybody takes their SIPSA for approval at the end of the school year for the next school year, and we realize that. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but this is, you know, something that was developed, and it's just a really good timeline. I know people have asked for it before, so it's in the shared folder, but you can see there like the CSI. Oh, sorry, it's okay, Brian, you don't have to go back. We don't have time. They can check it out. This one is actually one you're going to want to make a copy of if you're interested in using this one. If you make a copy and put it in your own folder, you can actually manipulate these little guys and move them around and put them on the timeline for yourself. So you can put, you know, your stakeholder engagement. When are you going to have those meetings? You can put it in the timeline. So if you wanted to present something like this to your school board to show them, hey, here's our plan, or to any parent groups or administrators that you wanted to show, you could do that. So it's a manipulative little document for you guys. And then this one is a great one to send out to parents or for schools to post, just kind of giving an update about what the LCAP cycle looks like for parents. So what should they be doing? So it gives some, you know, basics for fall. The questions that they should be asking, like where's the LCAP posted? And then questions about stakeholder engagement. So it's a really good document to get out to parents to start enticing them for that parent involvement. And then this one talks about interim metrics for mid-year adjustments. So remembering that the LCAP and our data is not static data, right? So we do talk about, you know, we're going to use our dashboard data, which is once a year, but things change, right? And we put actions into place, and those actions, we want to see if they're working, right? We want to do our PDSA cycles. We want to see if things are actually improving. So we want to do those mid-year assessments and say, hey, this action that I put into place, is it actually working? And you want to consider monitoring metrics. And we're not going to get into metrics today. We will talk about it a little more at the next session, but we did put this in here. This does need to be updated. I know Brian would like me to tell you that because the dashboard and everything changes constantly and things are changing. So this one is in there, but it is the one from last year, just an FYI. And then I think that's it. Any questions on any of those timelines? And if you do, go ahead and send a message or ask away, chat, whatever you need. Let us know.
Awesome. Thanks, Alicia. I think we'll pass on this final reflections and go on to finish the rest of the information there. So now I'm going to talk about support. And I'm going to actually skip a few of the upcoming slides because you guys can navigate the county website. And if not, then you can reference these slides to look where to click to access anything around LCAP. We are, the website is dynamic. We are updating as we speak, actually. So some of the LCAP workshops that are listed on the site have last year's dates. And so we're in a queue to have our have those updated, so you'll have the links to the current ones as soon as those are hot. And so that's the website piece, and then I'm going to just give a little brief explanation about FastPass as soon as we get through these slides. And there it is. So those of you who participated in the learning continuity and attendance plan previews, this is FastPass is very similar. We actually started FastPass a couple of years ago for LCAPs, and it is for all LEAs. You can see in that first bullet, we have workshops set up for both districts and charters this year. Our first one is right here, and that's for both districts and charters. It's not a separate one, and that will be virtual on November 6th. And so we will be all together on that date again. The last two bullets just talk about how we offer information through various networks, and it can provide in-district support as you need it. And as Melissa put in the chat, anytime you need anything, just reach out to us and we can provide customized support for you guys. On the next slide, what is FastPass? Basically, it's a preview of your draft LCAP before it is approved by the board. And so you're working on it, you know, and then we start the previews in May. go through June for a fast pass. And the next few slides will go into details about our process. And so why FastPass? Well, essentially it creates the streamlined feedback and revision process. So that way you go to your board and we can review your plan as many times as you want us to. We could just do it once, or we might do it 2 or 3 times, depending on how many times you want us to see it after you revise it. And what this does is it eliminates you having to go back to the board again, because once you go back to the board, once you go to the board, then whatever is approved, if anything's changed, you would have to go back and have it readopted. And so this eliminates any unnecessary revisions, multiple revisions, and going back to the board various times. You can email me. Usually what I do is I'll be sending a survey for those who want to participate in FastPass. And in that survey will, it asks you your usual thing, who you are, your district, but it will also indicate dates on when you might want to submit your draft, because with 23 districts and the number of charters participating, we would like to make sure that our timeline prioritizes the reading so that we can get feedback to you in time before you have to go for board approval. And I think we're almost at the end here. After FastPass is what we call compliance. So FastPass is just a preliminary review. We're just checking it, we're not looking at it. After that actually comes the compliance review. And so the county office has a team that conducts the compliance review, where we're actually looking at statutory requirements. And then you can see the CSES LCAP approval manual has not come out yet because it's being revised, but these are the 3 requirements that a county office must look at for an LCAP. Does the LCAP adhere to the template? So basically, did you use the state template that was put out? Are expenditures sufficient enough in the budget to implement the LCAP? And did the LCAP adhere to expenditure regulations? So is funding appropriated correctly? So those are what we look for when we look at compliance of the completion of the LCAP. We do offer feedback for compliance also, and those adjustments can be made by the LEA and then resubmitted to us again prior to board approval. And so once feedback is done, we will give final feedback on that last week or that 3rd week of June, and compliance ends there. And then your reviews go through a final approval from the county. And so here's just a brief steps of the FastPass. You go through local board approval process after you submit your LCAP to us after it's approved, and then we go to what I was referring to as the comprehensive review, and that is the final approval of your LCAP. That usually happens in July, and what we do is we have interdisciplinary and cross-unit teams that look at the LCAP. We've got program teams, and you can see there what they look for. The fiscal team looks for your adopted budget and make sure sufficient expenditures to implement the LCAP aligned to regulations. And then feedback is provided on that too. And an official letter goes to the district regarding the LCAP review and approval. This is a screenshot from CDE. You can take a look at it. It gives you like a process map of actions on the district part and the county office's part in terms of the LCAP approval. And I believe that's it. So with 2 minutes to spare, the last few slides just give us our team. I work with a fabulous, fabulous team in assessment, accountability, and continuous improvement. So the first 2 slides show our program team and our data team, and our amazing leader, Melissa Bozanos-Hutton, is always there to support all of us. We work in collaboration with our charter schools unit team as well. You guys know Corey, Kelly, Susan, and you may know Bethany. And then we also have our district fiscal services. We work hand in hand with them because we want to encourage and also model the collaboration between program and fiscal when it comes to LCAP development. And so James, Lindsay, Samantha, Annabelle, and Carolyn are always on hand to provide any support and questions regarding fiscal. In fact, they may be online next week, which We are going to have another session from 1 to 3. We'll go further into the goals, in the template, talking about the goals, the metrics, actions, and we'll also talk about the heavy increased improved services section, fiscal considerations, and take a look at the budget overview for parents. So that's what we have ongoing for next week. I want to pause for a moment if there are any questions or comments. I want to thank you all for joining us this Friday afternoon for these 2 hours. It's been wonderful. It was a great discussion. We will stay on to continue should anyone have any questions after the fact. But otherwise, our team and I wish you a great Friday afternoon and a happy weekend.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see most of you probably next week, same time.
Stop recording, Brian.
I feel like I need to apologize for